The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside Monticello, Utah, throwing Nora Osborne against the worn wooden interior hard enough to bruise her shoulder, and she knew without looking that every eye in that dusty frontier town would soon be fixed on her twisted left foot. The year was 1882, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to become the bride of a cattle rancher she had never met, a man who had advertised for a wife in the newspapers back east. Her sister had begged her not to go, had cried and pleaded that there were other options, better options than marrying a stranger in the Utah wilderness. But Nora had seen the pitying looks from potential suitors in Boston, had heard the whispered conversations that always ended the same way. A woman with a clubfoot, born with the deformity that twisted her left ankle and foot inward, was not considered marriage material among the society folk back home. She had taught herself to walk with only a slight limp, had learned to sew and cook and manage a household despite the pain that sometimes shot up her leg. Yet none of it mattered when young men looked at her and saw only what was different. The driver opened the door, and bright afternoon sunlight flooded the cramped space. Nora gathered her carpetbag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned in this world. She had worn her best dress for the arrival, a modest gray cotton with white lace collar that her mother had helped her make before the fever took her 2 years prior. Her dark brown hair was pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and she had scrubbed her face until it shone that morning at the last way station. Miss Osborne, the driver, a weathered man with a tobacco-stained beard, peered in at her. "This here's Monticello. Your intended said he would meet you at the general store." Nora nodded and accepted his hand to climb down. The moment her clubfoot touched the ground, she felt the familiar ache that never quite left her. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a single main street with false-fronted buildings lining each side. Dust hung in the air, stirred up by a hot wind that carried the smell of horses and sage. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the summer heat. She paid the driver and watched as he unloaded her trunk, setting it on the wooden boardwalk with a thump. Then he was climbing back up to his seat, calling to his team, and the stage was rolling away in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone in a strange town where she knew not a single soul. The general store stood directly across the street, its windows displaying everything from tin pans to bolts of calico. Nora picked up her carpetbag and began the slow walk across the rutted dirt road, leaving her trunk for the moment. Each step required concentration, the placement of her left foot always slightly off, always demanding more effort than should be necessary for such a simple task. She had learned long ago to hold her head high despite the stares, to pretend she did not notice when people looked away or whispered behind their hands. She had nearly reached the other side when a horse and rider came around the corner at a fast trot. The rider was not paying attention, his hat pulled low against the sun, and he did not see Nora until his mount was nearly upon her. The horse shied at the last second, rearing up with a startled whinny. Nora stumbled backward, her weak ankle giving way, and she fell hard into the dirt. The carpetbag flew from her hand, spilling its contents across the road. Her best nightgown, the letters from the rancher who had sent for her, a small degria type of her parents', all tumbled into the dust. Pain shot up her leg from where she had twisted the clubfoot, sharper than usual, and for a moment she could do nothing but sit there, breathing hard against the hurt. "Lord above, I am sorry." The rider was off his horse in an instant, dropping the reins and rushing to her side. "Are you hurt?" "I was not watching where I was going. The sun was right in my eyes and I did not see you until shadow spooked." Nora looked up at him, squinting against the bright light. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked hard for his living. His face was tanned dark from days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Those eyes were a striking pale blue, almost gray, and they were filled with genuine concern as he knelt beside her in the dust. "I am all right," Nora managed, though her ankle throbbed and she could feel tears of pain and embarrassment prickling behind her eyes. "Just startled. Let me help you up." He offered his hand and Nora took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The moment she put weight on her left foot, she gasped. The fall had worsened her usual pain and her ankle felt like it was on fire. The cowboy steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You are hurt. Here, sit down on the boardwalk and let me gather your things." "Please, I can manage," Nora protested. But he was already retrieving her scattered belongings, moving with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to action. He collected the nightgown, shaking the dust from it, then the letters and the daguerreotype, which he examined with interest before handing it back to her. "Your parents?" he asked. "Yes. They are both gone now." Something shifted in his expression, a softness that had not been there before. "I am sorry for your loss. I lost my own mother 3 years back. My father went 5 years before that." He gathered the last of her things and returned them to the carpet bag, then helped her to the boardwalk where she could sit on a bench outside the general store. Once she was settled, he stood back and really looked at her for the first time. His gaze traveled down to her feet, and Nora felt her cheeks burn as she saw him notice her twisted left boot, the way it turned inward at an unnatural angle. "Here it comes," she thought. The pity, or worse, the disgust. But the cowboy just nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. Then he met her eyes again, and there was no pity there, no revulsion, just that same calm concern. "I am Xavier Knox," he said. "I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town, and you must be Nora Osborne from Boston." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "You are Xavier Knox. You are the one who sent for me." "I am." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that needed cutting. "I expected to meet you at the store, not knock you down in the middle of the street. This is not the introduction I had planned." Nora stared at him, her mind racing. She had received 3 letters from Xavier Knox over the past 4 months, all of them carefully written, describing his ranch and his life and asking about hers. He had told her he was 28 years old, that he had built his ranch from nothing over the past 6 years, that he was looking for a wife to share his life and help him build something lasting in this hard country. The letters had been kind and thoughtful, and she had allowed herself to hope that perhaps this man might be different, might be willing to overlook her deformity. But in all their correspondence, she had never told him about her clubfoot. She had written about her education, her skills in the kitchen and with a needle, her love of books and her desire for a family of her own. But she had not mentioned the one thing that mattered most, the thing that had sent her fleeing Boston in the first place. "I did not tell you," she said quietly. "In my letters, I did not tell you about my foot." Xavier looked down at her twisted boot again, then back at her face. "No, you did not. May I ask what happened?" "I was born this way. The doctor said it is called a clubfoot. My ankle and foot did not form properly. I have always walked with a limp." She waited for him to make his excuses, to tell her that this changed everything, that he could not possibly marry a woman with such a defect. It was what the men in Boston had done, once they discovered the truth. Some had been kind about it, others less so, but the result was always the same. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his hat turning in his hands. Then he said, "Does it pain you much?" "Sometimes. Today it pains me quite a bit since I twisted it in the fall." "I am sorry for that." If I had been paying better attention to where I was going, none of this would have happened. He settled his hat back on his head and held out his hand to her. "Let me help you up. We should get you somewhere you can rest and ice that ankle." Nora took his hand uncertainly, rising to her feet. The pain was still sharp, and she could not help but gasp as she put weight on the injured foot. Xavier frowned. "That is too much pain for walking. Would you allow me to carry you? My ranch is too far, but the boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Peterson, who runs it, is a good woman. She can look after you while we talk about what comes next. Carry me." Nora felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I cannot ask you to do that. I can walk." "I have no doubt you can walk, but should you when you are already hurt and I am the one who caused it?" He gave her a slight smile. "I've carried newborn calves and full-grown sheep. I promise you are no burden." Before she could protest further, he had scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Nora let out a startled sound and instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. He smelled of leather and horse and sun-warmed cotton, and his arms were solid and steady beneath her. "My trunk," she managed. "It is still across the street. I will come back for it. First, let's get you settled." He carried her down the boardwalk, his boots making solid sounds on the wooden planks. Nora was acutely aware of the people stopping to stare, the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. But Xavier seemed not to notice or care. He walked with purpose, his long strides eating up the distance, until they reached a two-story building with a sign that read Peterson's boarding house. He pushed through the door with his shoulder, and suddenly they were in a dim, cool interior that smelled of beeswax and fresh bread. A plump woman with gray hair looked up from behind a desk, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Xavier Knox, what on earth?" "Mrs. Peterson, this is Nora Osborne, my intended from Boston. I had a bit of an accident and knocked her down in the street. She has hurt her ankle and needs a place to rest." Mrs. Peterson was around the desk in an instant, all maternal concern. "You poor dear. Bring her upstairs, Xavier. The room at the end of the hall is empty and has a nice breeze from the window." Xavier carried Nora up the narrow staircase, Mrs. Peterson bustling ahead of them to open doors. The room was simple but clean, with a brass bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a washstand with a flowered pitcher and basin, and a single window that looked out over the main street. Xavier set Nora down on the bed with surprising gentleness, then stepped back while Mrs. Peterson fussed over her. "Let me see that ankle, dear. Xavier, you go down and bring up some ice from the ice house, and while you are at it, fetch her trunk from wherever you left it." "Yes, madam." Xavier looked at Nora. "I will be right back. We still need to talk." He left, and Mrs. Peterson helped Nora remove her boot, clicking her tongue at the swollen ankle. "That is quite a turn you took, and you came all the way from Boston to marry that young man." "Yes." Nora watched as the older woman gently probed the injury. "Though I suspect he may change his mind now." "Change his mind? Why would he do that?" "Because I did not tell him about my clubfoot. I deceived him." Mrs. Peterson looked up, her eyes sharp despite the kindness in them. "Did he say he was changing his mind?" "Well, no. But he will, once he has time to think about it. I have known Xavier Knox for 6 years, since the day he rode into town with nothing but a horse and a dream. He is one of the finest young men I have ever met. Honest, hardworking, and kind to his core. If he was going to reject you, he would have done it the moment he saw your foot, not carried you here like you were made of spun glass." Before Nora could respond, Xavier returned with a chunk of ice wrapped in a towel and her trunk balanced on his shoulder. He set the trunk down against the wall, then handed the ice to Mrs. Peterson, who applied it to Nora's swelling ankle. "I will leave you two to talk," the older woman said. "But Xavier Knox, you keep this door open and stay where I can see you from the hall. I will not have people saying I run an improper establishment. Of course, Mrs. Peterson. Xavier pulled a straight-backed chair to the side of the bed and sat down, his hat in his hands again. Once the landlady had left, positioned where she could indeed see them but not quite hear, he looked at Nora with those calm blue eyes. "So," he said, "we find ourselves in an unexpected situation." "I am sorry I did not tell you," Nora said quickly. "I should have been honest from the beginning. If you want to send me back to Boston, I will understand. I have enough money saved for the return ticket." Xavier shook his head. "Why would I send you back? Because I am not what you thought you were getting. You wanted a wife who could help you build your ranch, and instead you got a woman who can barely walk without pain." "Can you cook?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Can you cook? You said in your letters that you were skilled in the kitchen. Was that true?" "Yes, but what does that have to do with anything? Can you sew, manage household accounts, all those things you wrote about?" "Yes, all of it is true. But my foot—" "Your foot," Xavier interrupted gently, "affects the way you walk. It does not affect your mind or your hands or your character. From your letters, I judged you to be an intelligent, thoughtful woman with a good heart and the courage to travel 2,000 miles to start a new life. Has your foot changed any of that?" Nora stared at him, speechless. In all her life, no one had ever dismissed her deformity so completely, as if it were no more significant than the color of her hair. "I do not understand," she finally managed. "Every man I have ever met has turned away once they saw my clubfoot. Some were kind about it, others were cruel, but they all left just the same." Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then those men were fools, and I am glad you did not marry any of them. Nora, I am not looking for a wife who can outrun a horse or dance at every social. I am looking for a partner, someone who can share my life and help me build something that will last. Someone I can talk to at the end of a long day, someone who will stand beside me through the hard times and celebrate with me in the good times. Your letters told me you might be that person. Has anything really changed? Everything has changed. You know now that I am defective." The word came out bitter and Xavier flinched. "You are not defective. You are different. There is a world of distance between those two things. Not in most people's eyes. Then most people are wrong." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and his grip was gentle but firm. "Nora, I will not lie and say your foot does not matter at all. It matters because it causes you pain, and I hate that. It matters because it will affect how we do some things, the accommodations we will need to make. But it does not matter to whether I want to marry you, because that was never about your foot. It was about who you are as a person." Tears stung Nora's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not now. "You truly mean that?" "I do. But I understand if you need time to believe it. This is not how I planned our first meeting." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "I was going to be waiting at the general store, all cleaned up with my Sunday clothes on. I was going to say something impressive and intelligent. Instead, I knocked you down in the street and had to carry you here like a sack of grain." Despite herself, Nora laughed. It came out watery, but it was a laugh nonetheless. "I would not say like a sack of grain. You were quite careful." "I am glad you think so." He squeezed her hand. "So here is what I propose. You stay here at the boarding house for a few days, let that ankle heal up. We can spend some time together, get to know each other beyond letters. If at the end of that time you still want to marry me, we will go see the circuit judge when he comes through next week. If you decide this is not what you want, I will pay for your ticket back to Boston, and there will be no hard feelings. Does that sound fair?" It sounded more than fair. It sounded like a miracle. "You would do that, of course." Marriage is not something to rush into just because you traveled a long way. We should both be certain. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Now, I need to get back to the ranch and check on my men, but I will come back tomorrow morning and take you to breakfast at the hotel. They make the best flapjacks in the territory. Xavier, Nora said as he reached the door. He turned back and she forced herself to meet his eyes. Thank you for not turning me away. His expression softened. Thank you for coming all this way. That took more courage than you know. After he left, Nora lay back against the pillows, her mind whirling. The ice was beginning to numb the pain in her ankle, and Mrs. Peterson had promised to bring up a tray of food soon. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of Monticello settling into evening, horses being led to stables, doors closing, the distant laughter of children at play. She thought about Xavier Knox, about the way he had looked at her clubfoot with nothing more than practical concern, as if it were simply another fact to be considered and dealt with. She thought about the gentleness in his hands as he had carried her, the sincerity in his voice when he said she was not defective. Could it be true? Could she really have found a man who saw past her deformity to the person beneath? Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, Nora felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and warm, with a brilliant blue sky that seemed to stretch forever. Nora woke early, her ankle still sore but much improved after a night of rest. Mrs. Peterson had brought up warm water for washing, and Nora cleaned herself as best she could, then put on a fresh dress, this one a soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She was sitting on the bed, lacing up her boots and trying to ignore the discomfort in her left ankle when she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Xavier appeared in the doorway, once again in clean clothes, his hair slicked back and his face freshly shaved. "Good morning," he said. "How is the ankle?" "Better, thank you. Still sore, but much improved." "Good. Are you up for that breakfast I promised? Or would you rather rest another day?" Nora stood, testing her weight on the injured foot. It hurt, but not unbearably. "I think I can manage breakfast. No need to manage." Xavier stepped into the room, and before she could protest, he had scooped her up again. "The hotel is 4 doors down. I can have you there in less than a minute." "Xavier, people will talk. Let them. You are my intended bride, and I knocked you down yesterday. Carrying you is the least I can do." He was true to his word, carrying her down the stairs and out onto the boardwalk with the same easy strength he had shown the day before. A few people did indeed stop and stare, including an older man with a marshal's star on his vest who called out, "Everything all right there, Xavier?" "Just fine, Marshal Tucker. Just taking care of my intended." The hotel dining room was larger than Nora expected, with a dozen tables covered in checkered cloths and a kitchen at the back from which delicious smells were wafting. Xavier set her down in a chair near the window, then took the seat across from her. A young woman with red hair came to take their order, grinning at Xavier. "Is this the mail-order bride we have all been hearing about?" "Her name is Nora Osborne, and she is from Boston," Xavier said firmly. "Nora, this is Stella, who makes the best pies in Utah Territory." "Pleased to meet you," Nora said, warming to the friendly smile on Stella's face. "Likewise. What can I get you folks?" They ordered flapjacks and eggs and coffee, and while they waited, Xavier told her more about his ranch. He had arrived in Monticello 6 years ago with very little money and big dreams, working as a ranch hand for other people until he had saved enough to buy his own land. He had started small, with just a few head of cattle and a one-room cabin he built himself. Over the years, he had expanded bit by bit, buying more land when he could, building up his herd, hiring men to help during the busy seasons. "It is not fancy," he warned her. "The house is still small, just 3 rooms now. I added on a bedroom and a kitchen after I built the original cabin. But it is solid and weatherproof, and the land is good. There is a creek that runs year-round and enough grazing for twice the cattle I have now." "It sounds wonderful," Nora said honestly. "I am not looking for fancy. I just want a real home." Their food arrived, and Nora discovered that Stella had not exaggerated. The flapjacks were light and fluffy, served with butter and syrup, and the eggs were cooked perfectly. She realized she was hungrier than she had thought, having eaten little on the final leg of her journey. As they ate, Xavier asked about her life in Boston, and Nora found herself telling him things she had not put in her letters. About her childhood as the youngest of 4 children, the only one born with a deformity. About her mother's determination to make sure she learned everything a proper young lady should know, as if education and accomplishments could somehow make up for her twisted foot. About her father's shipping business, which had supported them comfortably until his death 3 years ago. About the way her brothers and sister had all married and moved away, leaving her alone in the family home with her mother until the fever came. "After Mother died, I stayed in the house for a year," Nora said quietly. "My sister begged me to come live with her and her husband in New York, but I could not bear to be a burden. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper one day and I thought, why not? What did I have to lose?" "Everything," Xavier said seriously. "You gave up everything you knew to come out here." "That is not a small thing. What I had was not much. A house full of memories and a future that held nothing but loneliness. At least here I have a chance at something more. I hope you find it." He pushed back his plate and pulled out a small pouch from his pocket. "I have something for you." "I was going to wait, but now seems like the right time." He opened the pouch and shook something into his palm. It was a ring, simple and beautiful, a gold band with a small blue stone set in the center. "It was my mother's," Xavier said. "The only thing of value my parents brought west with them. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died. I would be honored if you would wear it now as a symbol of our intention to marry." Nora stared at the ring, her throat tight. "Xavier, I cannot. This is too precious." "My mother would have wanted you to have it. She always said the best marriages were built on friendship and respect, not just passion. I think we can have that if you are willing to try." Slowly, Nora held out her hand. Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit as if it had been made for her. The blue stone caught the light from the window, throwing tiny sparks of color across the tablecloth. "It is beautiful," Nora whispered. "I will treasure it. I am glad." Xavier reached across the table and took both her hands in his, the ring glinting between them. "I know this is all happening fast, and I know we still have much to learn about each other, but I want you to know that I am committed to making this work if you are." "I am," Nora said, and she meant it with all her heart. They spent the rest of the morning walking slowly around Monticello, Xavier adjusting his long stride to match her slower pace. He showed her the general store, where the owner's wife exclaimed over the news of their engagement. He introduced her to Marshall Tucker, who turned out to be a kind man with a booming laugh. They visited the church, a simple white building with a bell tower, where the Reverend welcomed Nora warmly and promised to perform the ceremony whenever they were ready. By noon, Nora's ankle was aching again, and Xavier could see her beginning to limp more heavily. "That is enough walking for one day," he said firmly. "Let me take you back to the boarding house so you can rest." "I am fine," Nora protested, but another step sent a sharp pain shooting up her leg, and she could not quite hide the wince. "You are not fine, and there is no shame in admitting it." He picked her up again, and this time Nora did not argue. The pain was bad enough that she was grateful for the relief, Back in her room, with her foot propped up in another ice pack supplied by Mrs. Peterson, Nora felt the embarrassment washing over her. "I am sorry. I should have said something sooner. Why should you apologize for being in pain?" Xavier was sitting in the same chair as the day before, his expression concerned. "Nora, I need you to understand something. If we are going to be married, you have to be honest with me about this. If your foot hurts, tell me. If you need to rest, say so. I cannot help if I do not know what you need." "I have spent my whole life trying to prove I am not weak," Nora said quietly. "Trying to show that I can do everything everyone else can do, just as well and just as fast. That must be exhausting." The simple observation broke through her defenses in a way that pity never could. "Yes," she admitted, "it is." "Then let's make a deal. When it is just us, you do not have to prove anything. You can be honest about what you need, and I will be honest with you about what I need. Does that sound fair?" "What could you possibly need from me?" Xavier smiled. "Plenty. Patience, for one. I have been alone a long time and I am set in my ways. I talk to myself when I work and I am told I snore something fierce. I'm not much good at fancy conversation and I would rather be outdoors than in. I need someone who can tolerate all that and still want to stay." "I think I can manage that," Nora said, returning his smile. "Then we have an accord." He stood and settled his hat on his head. "I need to get back to the ranch, but I will come back tomorrow. And Nora, thank you for being honest with me just now. It means more than you know." After he left, Nora lay back against the pillows, her fingers tracing the band of the ring on her finger. 2 days ago, she had been on a stagecoach, terrified of what awaited her in this strange western town. Now she was engaged to a man who seemed almost too good to be true. A man who looked at her clubfoot and simply asked what she needed, rather than turning away in disgust. It was, she thought, the beginning of something she had never dared to hope for. The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. Xavier would arrive each morning, carrying Nora to breakfast at the hotel or bringing food from Mrs. Peterson's kitchen so they could eat in the boarding house parlor. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps between their letters, learning the small details that made up a life. Nora learned that Xavier loved horses almost as much as he loved the land itself, that he had taught himself to read from an old Bible his mother had owned, that his favorite time of day was early morning when the world was still and quiet. He told her about the hard years when he first came west, when he had worked 18-hour days and slept in barns because he could not afford a room. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, the plans he had to build a proper house someday, with a porch where he could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. In turn, Nora told him about her love of books, how she had read everything she could get her hands on as a child. She confessed her fear of thunder, a holdover from a storm that had terrified her when she was small. She described the ocean, which Xavier had never seen, trying to capture in words the endless expanse of water and the cry of gulls overhead. By the 4th day, Nora's ankle had healed enough that she could walk without severe pain, though she still limped noticeably. Xavier suggested they take a ride out to his ranch so she could see her future home. "If you are comfortable riding," he added. "I know your foot might make it difficult." "I have not ridden since I was a girl," Nora admitted, "but I would like to try." Xavier borrowed a gentle mare from the livery stable, a sweet-tempered bay named Molly who stood patiently while he helped Nora into the saddle. Her clubfoot made mounting awkward, but Xavier simply lifted her up and arranged her skirts modestly over her legs. "If you get tired or uncomfortable, just tell me and we will stop," he said, swinging up onto his own horse, the black gelding named Shadow who had nearly run her down on her first day in town. They rode out of Monticello at a walk, heading north on a dusty trail that wound between sage-covered hills. The day was warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. Nora found that riding was easier than walking, the movement of the horse steady and rhythmic, requiring no effort from her injured foot. Xavier pointed out landmarks as they rode, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the fork in the creek where he liked to fish in the summer, the line of cottonwood trees that marked the boundary of his land. He told her about his neighbors, few and far between in this sparsely settled country. The nearest was an older couple, the Callahans, who lived about 3 miles east. They were good people, Xavier said, who had welcomed him when he first arrived and helped him through those difficult first years. After about an hour of riding, they crested a low hill and Xavier reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing. "That is home." Nora shaded her eyes against the sun and looked where he was pointing. She saw a small cabin nestled in a valley with a barn and a couple of outbuildings nearby. The cabin was made of logs, with a stone chimney on one end and a small porch across the front. It was simple and rustic, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Beyond the buildings, she could see a creek glinting in the sunlight and pastureland rolling away to the horizon. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the gold of the grass. "It is beautiful," Nora said honestly. "Xavier, it is truly beautiful." She could see the pride and relief in his face. "It is not much compared to what you had in Boston." "It is perfect," she corrected. "It looks like a place where a person could build a life." They rode down into the valley, and as they got closer, Nora could see more details. The cabin was indeed small, but Xavier had clearly taken care with it. The logs were well chinked, the roof looked sound, and someone had planted roses beside the porch, though they were struggling in the summer heat. The barn was larger than the house, a necessity on a working ranch, with a corral attached where several horses stood dozing in the shade. 2 men came out of the barn as they approached, both of them stopping to stare at the sight of Xavier with a woman. He raised a hand in greeting. "Nora, these are my hired men, Tom Riley and Jack Foster. They help me run the ranch." "Tom, Jack, this is Nora Osborne, my intended bride from Boston." Tom was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. Jack was younger, perhaps 25, with a shock of red hair and a shy smile. Both of them swept off their hats and nodded respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Tom said. "Xavier has talked of nothing else since he got your first letter." "Tom," Xavier said with a warning tone, but he was grinning. "It is nice to meet you both," Nora said warmly. Xavier dismounted and came around to help Nora down from her horse. She was stiff from the ride, and when her clubfoot hit the ground, it sent a jolt of pain up her leg. She must have made a sound, because Xavier's hands tightened on her waist. "Steady," he murmured. "Just take a moment." She did, breathing through the discomfort until it faded to a manageable ache. When she looked up, she saw Tom and Jack trying not to stare at her twisted boot. Xavier saw it too. "Nora was born with a clubfoot," he said matter-of-factly. "It does not slow her down much, but sometimes she needs to rest. I expect you both to treat her with the respect she deserves and help her however she needs. Understood?" "Yes, sir," they both said quickly, and Nora felt a rush of gratitude for Xavier's straightforward approach. No awkward tiptoeing around the subject, no pretending it did not exist. Just a simple statement of fact and clear expectations. Xavier took her on a tour of the ranch, moving slowly so she could keep up. He showed her the barn where his horses and a milk cow lived. He showed her the hen house, where chickens scratched and pecked in the dirt. He took her to the creek and had her sit on a large flat rock while he told her about the fish that lived in the deep pools upstream. Finally, he brought her to the cabin and opened the door. "It is not fancy," he said again, "but it is clean, and it is yours if you will have it." The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Nora's eyes a moment to adjust. She saw a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough table and chairs, and a few shelves holding supplies. A doorway led to what must be the bedroom, and another to the kitchen Xavier had mentioned. The floor was made of split logs, worn smooth by use, and covered here and there with rag rugs. Everything was neat and orderly, the work of a man who had been taking care of himself for a long time. "It is wonderful," Nora said, and meant it. "I can already see how to make it a home." Xavier's face lit up. "You mean that?" "I do. It has good bones, and it is clear you have taken care of it. With a few touches, some curtains, and perhaps some better furniture, it will be perfect." He showed her the bedroom, which held a simple bed frame and mattress, a trunk, and a washstand. Then the kitchen, which was better equipped than she had expected, with a good iron stove, shelves of dishes and pots, and a work table near the window. "I had Mrs. Callahan help me set up the kitchen," Xavier admitted. "I am not much of a cook beyond the basics, and I wanted to make sure you had what you needed." "It is very thoughtful." Nora ran her hand along the work table, imagining herself standing here, preparing meals, looking out the window at the valley. It was a far cry from the grand house in Boston, but somehow it felt more real, more honest. They sat on the porch in the shade, drinking water from the well while Xavier told her about the daily routine of the ranch. Up before dawn to feed the animals and check on the cattle. Breakfast at sunrise. Days spent mending fences, doctoring sick animals, moving the herd to new grazing. Supper at sunset, then evenings spent by lamplight, reading or mending tack or planning for the next season. "It is hard work," he said honestly, "especially in calving season and when we move the cattle to winter pasture, but it is good work, meaningful work. And I sleep well at night knowing I built this with my own hands." "I want to help," Nora said. "I know I cannot do everything you do, but I can cook and clean and tend the chickens and the garden. I can keep the books and mend your clothes. I can do my part. I know you can." He reached over and took her hand. "Nora, I need you to understand something. I am not marrying you because I need a housekeeper or a cook. I am marrying you because I want a partner, someone to share my life with. If your foot means you cannot do certain things, that is fine. We will figure it out together." "You keep saying things like that," Nora said wonderingly, "things I never thought I would hear from anyone. Then you have been around the wrong people." He stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "Come on, I will take you back to town before you get too tired. But I want you to think about what you saw today. This will be your home if you marry me. Make sure it is what you want." On the ride back to Monticello, Nora thought about everything she had seen. The simple cabin, so different from the elegant house she had grown up in. The wide open spaces, the endless sky, the silence broken only by the wind and the call of birds. The hard work that would be required just to live from day to day. And Xavier, with his kind eyes and gentle hands and absolute refusal to see her as less than whole. By the time they reached the boarding house, Nora had made her decision. "I want to marry you," she said as Xavier helped her down from her horse. "I have thought about it, and I am certain, if you are still willing, I want to be your wife." Xavier's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am more than willing. The circuit judge is due to arrive tomorrow. If you are ready, we can be married the day after." "I am ready," Nora said firmly. "I have never been more ready for anything in my life." He kissed her then, a soft, brief press of his lips against hers. It was Nora's first kiss, and her heart raced with the sweetness of it. "Then day after tomorrow, you will be Mrs. Xavier Knox," he said softly, "and we will start our life together." The wedding took place on a bright Thursday morning in the little white church at the edge of town. Nora wore a new dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, a simple gown of cream-colored cotton with tiny pearl buttons down the back. Her hair was pinned up in soft curls, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Xavier had picked that morning. There were not many guests, but the ones who came were genuine in their well wishes. Tom and Jack stood up as witnesses, along with Mrs. Peterson and Marshall Tucker. The Callahans had ridden in from their ranch, and several townspeople who had gotten to know Nora over the past week filled the other pews. But Nora barely noticed any of them. Her eyes were fixed on Xavier, who stood at the front of the church looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit. His hair was freshly cut, and he had shaved so carefully that she could see a tiny nick on his jaw. The Reverend led them through the vows, and when it came time to speak, Nora's voice was clear and steady. "I, Nora Osborne, take you, Xavier Knox, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Xavier's eyes were bright as he repeated the same words, his hand warm and steady around hers. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed her again, longer this time, and the small congregation burst into applause. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel, where Stella had prepared a wedding feast of roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and a beautiful cake covered in white frosting. People ate and drank and toasted the happy couple, and Nora found herself laughing more than she had in years. Mrs. Callahan, a tiny woman with bright blue eyes and silver hair, pulled Nora aside at one point. "You have made a good choice, my dear. Xavier is a fine man, one of the best I have ever known. He will treat you right." "I believe he will," Nora said. "He already has, and you will be good for him. He has been alone too long, that boy. He needs someone to come home to, someone to remind him there is more to life than work." As the afternoon wore on, Xavier came and found Nora where she was sitting with Mrs. Peterson, her ankle propped up after too much standing. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Knox, Mrs. Knox?" The name sent a thrill through her. "I am ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon Xavier had brought for the occasion, loaded with Nora's trunk and several boxes of supplies people had given them as wedding gifts. Xavier handed her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rode out of town, heading north toward the ranch, Nora felt a sense of peace settling over her. She was leaving behind everything familiar, yes, but she was moving toward something better. A life built on honesty and respect, with a man who saw her for who she truly was. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Xavier carried her over the threshold, as tradition demanded, then set her down gently in the main room where he had lit the lamps to welcome them home. "Welcome to your new home," he said softly. "I hope you will be happy here." "I already am," Nora assured him. She looked around at the simple room, at the fire crackling in the hearth and the wildflowers Xavier had placed on the table. It was nothing like the grand house in Boston, but it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever been. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Xavier patient with Nora's inexperience, taking time to put her at ease. He helped her with the tiny buttons on her dress, his fingers fumbling only slightly. He kissed her slowly, deeply, until she relaxed in his arms. And when they came together, it was with a gentleness that brought tears to Nora's eyes. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Nora traced the lines of his face with her fingertips. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered. "A husband who loved me, a real marriage. I thought I would spend my whole life alone." "You are not alone anymore," Xavier said firmly. "You will never be alone again. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." and lying there in the warm darkness, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, Nora believed him. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Nora threw herself into making the cabin a real home, sewing curtains for the windows and rugs for the floors. She planted an herb garden near the kitchen door and learned the quirks of the iron stove. She took over the cooking, and Xavier praised her meals with an enthusiasm that made her blush. For his part, Xavier was careful to adjust his life to accommodate Nora's needs without making her feel like a burden. He built her a small bench to sit on while she worked in the kitchen, so she could take the weight off her clubfoot. He made sure she had plenty of opportunities to rest during the day. When they walked together, he matched his pace to hers without comment, and when she needed to be carried, he simply picked her up as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I have been thinking," Xavier said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "In the fall, after we sell the cattle, I want to take you to Salt Lake City. There is a doctor there who specializes in difficult cases. Maybe he could help with your foot, ease the pain." Nora stiffened. "I do not want to be fixed, Xavier. I am not trying to fix you. I am trying to help you be more comfortable. There is a difference. I have seen doctors. They all say the same thing. The foot cannot be corrected, not without surgery, and even then there are no guarantees. Most likely I would just end up worse off than I am now." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Then we will not do surgery, but maybe this doctor knows of other things that could help. A different kind of boot, perhaps, or exercises that might ease the pain. It would not hurt to ask." Put that way, Nora had to admit he had a point. "All right, we can go and talk to him. But I am not promising anything. That is all I ask." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I just want you to be as comfortable as possible, that is all." As summer turned to fall, Nora settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to collect eggs without getting pecked by the temperamental hens. She mastered the art of making bread in the finicky oven. She took over the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting filling the ledger Xavier had neglected for too long. She also got to know Tom and Jack, the two ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse near the barn. Tom was a widower who had lost his wife to cholera 10 years before. He was quiet and hardworking, with a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught Nora off guard. Jack was younger and more talkative, full of stories about his childhood in Missouri and his dreams of someday having his own ranch. They were both respectful of Nora, touching their hats when they saw her, thanking her profusely for the meals she sent out to the bunkhouse. And they never once made her feel like her clubfoot was something strange or shameful. One morning in late September, Nora woke to the sound of rain on the roof. It was the first real rain since she had arrived in Utah, and she lay in bed for a moment, listening to the steady drumming and breathing in the fresh, clean smell that came through the open window. Xavier was already up and dressed, standing at the window and looking out at the downpour. "This is good," he said when he saw she was awake. "We have needed rain, but it means I will be working close to the house today so the cattle do not drift too far." "I will make a big breakfast," Nora said, swinging her legs out of bed. "Something hot and filling to start the day." She made flapjacks and bacon and eggs, and Xavier ate with the appetite of a man who would spend the day working in the rain. After he left, pulling on his slicker and heading out into the downpour, Nora cleaned up the kitchen and then settled in the main room with her sewing basket. She was making Xavier a new shirt, a surprise for his birthday next month. The rain continued all day, a steady soaking rain that drummed on the roof and turned the yard to mud. By afternoon, Nora had finished the shirt and moved on to mending socks. She was just thinking about starting supper when she heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Xavier and Tom riding in, leading a pack horse. Even through the rain, she could see something was wrong. Tom was slumped in his saddle, and Xavier was riding close beside him, one hand on the older man's arm as if to steady him. Nora grabbed her shawl and hurried out onto the porch, heedless of her limping gait. By the time she reached the edge of the yard, Xavier had dismounted and was helping Tom down from his horse. "He got kicked by a spooked steer," Xavier said tersely. "Caught him in the ribs. I need to get him inside and check how bad it is." Together they managed to get Tom into the house and onto one of the chairs. The older man was pale and breathing shallowly, his hand pressed to his left side. When Xavier carefully lifted his shirt, Nora could see a massive bruise already forming across his ribs. "I am fine," Tom protested weakly. "Just got the wind knocked out of me." "You have broken ribs at minimum," Xavier said. "Possibly worse. Nora, can you help me get him more comfortable?" They moved Tom to the bed in the spare room, the small space off the kitchen that Xavier had been using for storage. Nora brought blankets and hot water while Xavier examined Tom's injuries as carefully as he could. "I do not think anything is punctured," Xavier finally said, "but those ribs are definitely broken. He needs to rest and stay still while they heal." "I cannot stay in bed," Tom protested. "There is work to be done. Jack and I can handle it. You just concentrate on healing." Xavier looked at Nora. "Can you look after him during the day while Jack and I are out?" "Of course," Nora said immediately. "I will take good care of him," and she did. For the next several weeks, as Tom healed slowly from his injuries, Nora tended to him with the same care she would have given her own father. She brought him meals and helped him sit up to eat. She changed the bandages that wrapped his ribs and made sure he had water and anything else he needed. She even read to him from Xavier's small collection of books, her voice filling the quiet room. Tom was an awkward patient at first, clearly uncomfortable with being cared for. But gradually he relaxed, and they began to talk. He told her about his wife, Emily, and how much he had loved her. He described his children, all grown now and scattered across the country. He spoke of his years working ranches from Texas to Montana, always moving, never settling until Xavier had offered him steady work and a place to stay. "Xavier is a good man," Tom said one afternoon as Nora spooned soup into his mouth. "One of the best I have ever known. He took me on when other ranchers turned me away, said I was too old to be useful. He treats me like family, not just hired help." "He is a good man," Nora agreed softly. "I am blessed to have found him." "He is blessed to have found you too. I have seen the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars, and I have seen the way you look at him. That is a real marriage you two have, built on something solid." By the time Tom was well enough to return to light work, it was late October. The aspens on the mountainsides had turned gold, and there was a crisp bite to the morning air that promised winter was not far off. Xavier kept his promise and took Nora to Salt Lake City to see the doctor. They traveled by train, a new experience for Nora that left her both exhilarated and exhausted. The city was larger than anything she had seen since leaving Boston, bustling and modern, with electric lights that Xavier stared at in wonder. The doctor examined Nora's clubfoot carefully, asking questions about her pain and mobility. In the end, he confirmed what she had always been told. Surgery was possible but risky and unlikely to provide significant improvement. However, he did have suggestions. A specially designed boot that would provide better support. Exercises she could do to strengthen the surrounding muscles. A tonic he could prescribe that might help with the inflammation and pain. Xavier paid for everything without hesitation, and they left the doctor's office with hope that Nora's daily life might become a bit easier. They spent 2 more days in Salt Lake City, and Xavier took her shopping, insisting she pick out things she wanted for the house and for herself. She chose fabric for new curtains, a set of good china, and a beautiful shawl that Xavier wrapped around her shoulders in the store, declaring it matched her eyes perfectly. On the train ride home, Nora leaned against Xavier's shoulder, watching the landscape roll past the window. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking me to the doctor, for the gifts, for everything. You do not need to thank me. You are my wife. It is my joy to give you things that make you happy." "I am happy," Nora said. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "Then we are even, because you have made me happier than I ever thought possible." Winter came to the valley in a rush, with a snowstorm that lasted 3 days and left drifts up to the porch railings. The ranch work became harder, with Xavier and Jack spending long hours breaking ice on the water troughs and carrying feed to the cattle. Tom, still recovering, helped Nora with the indoor tasks, hauling wood for the stove and repairing tack in the warmth of the house. Nora threw herself into preparing for Christmas, determined to make the holiday special. She baked cookies and bread and pies. She sewed gifts for everyone, shirts for Xavier and the ranch hands, a quilt for the bed. On Christmas Eve, they all gathered in the cabin, Tom and Jack joining Xavier and Nora for a feast of roasted chicken and all the trimmings. After dinner, Xavier produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "For you," he said, handing it to Nora. "Open it." Inside was a book, leather-bound and beautiful. Nora opened it and found the pages blank. "A journal," she breathed. "I thought you could write in it. You are always talking about the books you used to read. Maybe you could write your own book about your life here." "Xavier, this is too much." "No," he said firmly. "It is not enough. I want you to have everything you want, Nora, everything you need to be happy." She kissed him then in front of Tom and Jack, not caring that they grinned and looked away. "I have everything I need right here," she said against his lips. "I have you." The winter passed slowly, the days short and cold. But the cabin was warm and bright, filled with laughter and good food. Nora wrote in her journal most evenings, recording the events of their days, the funny things Jack said, the quiet wisdom Tom shared, the 100 small ways Xavier showed his love. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the valley green again, Nora knew with certainty that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when her monthly courses failed to appear for the 3rd time, she was sure. She told Xavier on a warm evening in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. "In the fall, I think." Xavier went completely still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "A baby, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor." A grin spread across his face, wide and joyous. He let out a whoop and jumped to his feet, scooping Nora up in his arms and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby. Did you hear that?" He called toward the barn, where Tom and Jack were finishing up the evening chores. "Nora and I are going to have a baby." Tom and Jack came running, and there were handshakes and backslaps and excited congratulations. Jack declared it called for a celebration and produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. Tom toasted the baby's health and Nora's, his eyes suspiciously bright. Later, alone in their bed, Xavier held Nora close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you scared?" he asked softly. "A little," Nora admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if my clubfoot somehow affects the baby? Then we will deal with it together, just like we deal with everything else. But I think our baby will be perfect, whether or not they have 2 good feet. Because they will be ours and they will be loved." "I hope the baby looks like you," Nora said. "With your eyes and your smile. I hope they have your brains and your courage. Those are far more important than looks. As the pregnancy progressed, Xavier became even more protective. He insisted Nora rest more, take on fewer heavy tasks. He brought her wildflowers and pretty rocks he found while working. He talked to her belly in the evenings, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. Mrs. Callahan rode over once a week to check on Nora, bringing advice and old baby clothes that her own children had outgrown years ago. Mrs. Peterson came from town occasionally with supplies and gossip, always leaving with the latest update on the pregnancy to share with the townspeople. In late October, when the aspens were gold again and there was frost on the morning grass, Nora went into labor. Xavier sent Jack racing to town to fetch the midwife while he and Tom stayed with Nora, trying to keep her calm and comfortable. The labor was long and difficult. Nora's clubfoot made it hard to find comfortable positions, and the pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. But Xavier stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he told her again and again. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer." Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, their baby was born. A boy, healthy and strong, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that proved their strength with his first wailing cry. "He is perfect," the midwife said, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket and placing him in Nora's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and as healthy as can be. Nora looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." Xavier was sitting beside the bed, his face awed as he looked at his son. "Can I hold him?" Nora carefully transferred the baby into Xavier's arms, and she watched as this big, strong man cradled the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "Hello, son," Xavier said softly. "I am your papa, and I promise you I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." They named him Daniel Thomas Knox, after Xavier's father and the ranch hand who had become like family. Tom cried openly when they told him, and Jack declared the baby would be the finest rancher in all of Utah Territory. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Daniel was a good baby, fussy only when hungry or tired, but he still woke several times each night. Nora was tired all the time, but she had never been happier. Watching Xavier with their son, seeing this tough cowboy coo over a tiny baby, melted her heart again and again. Xavier adjusted his work schedule so he could be close to the house more often. He built a cradle for Daniel and a rocking chair for Nora. He walked the floor with the baby when he cried, singing off key lullabies that somehow always worked to soothe the infant. When winter came again, they spent their evenings as a family in front of the fire, Daniel sleeping in his cradle while Xavier read aloud and Nora sewed. On weekends, Tom and Jack would join them, the older men taking turns holding the baby and telling him stories about the ranch. As the seasons turned and Daniel grew from an infant to a toddler, Nora watched him closely for any sign that he might have inherited her clubfoot. But his legs and feet developed normally, strong and straight. She was relieved and grateful, even as she felt a small pang of something that might have been lost. Her son would never know what it was like to be different, to be looked at with pity or disgust. He would run and jump and play without pain or limitation. "He is going to be fast," Xavier said one day, watching as 15-month-old Daniel toddled after the chickens, giggling with delight. "Look at him go." "He takes after his father," Nora said with a smile. "Then I will have to teach him to slow down sometimes." Xavier came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Teach him that the best things in life are worth taking your time for. Like what? Like walking with someone you love, like watching a sunset, like building a life that matters. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. You taught me that, you know. Before you came, I was always rushing, always working, never taking time to just be. You taught me to slow down and appreciate what I have. Nora leaned into his embrace. I think we taught each other. You taught me that I was not broken, that my clubfoot did not define me. You saw me for who I really was. I saw a beautiful, brave woman who crossed a continent to take a chance on a stranger. I saw someone who could build a home out of nothing, who could love with her whole heart. I saw you, Nora, and I fell in love with every part of you. 2 years later, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Rose, after Tom's late wife and the roses that still struggled by the porch. Emily was different from Daniel in every way, quiet where he had been loud, content where he had been restless. She had Xavier's blue eyes and Nora's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she was the apple of her father's eye. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Xavier bought more land, increased the herd, built a larger house with a real parlor and bedrooms for the children. They kept the old cabin as a guest house, and Tom moved into it when his age began to make the bunkhouse too difficult. Jack met a girl in town, the new school teacher, and courted her with Xavier's advice and encouragement. They married in the church where Xavier and Nora had wed, and Xavier helped Jack buy a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch where he could start his own herd. More children came, another son they named Samuel, and then twin girls, Alice and Anne. The house was always full of noise and laughter, the chaos of family life. Nora had to let the older children help with many tasks, as her clubfoot limited how much she could do with 5 active children. But she never felt inadequate. Xavier made sure of that, telling her again and again that she was the heart of their family, the one who held everything together. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier took Nora back to the spot where he had first shown her the ranch. They sat on the same hill, looking down at the valley, but everything was different now. The cabin had been replaced by a proper house. The barn was larger, and there were more outbuildings. The cattle had multiplied and horses grazed in the pastures. I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Nora said softly. It feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stage, terrified of what I would find. I remember seeing you for the first time, Xavier said. You were so pretty in that gray dress, trying so hard to be brave. I knew right then that you were special. Even before you knew about my clubfoot. Especially after I knew about your clubfoot. Because when I told you it did not matter, you looked at me like I had given you the moon. No one had ever looked at me like that before. And I thought, this is a woman who has been told all her life that she is less than she is. I wanted to spend every day proving to her that she is more, so much more than she knows. Nora turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. You have done that. Every single day for 10 years you have shown me that I am loved and valued, not despite my clubfoot but as I am, all of me. Because that is the truth. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the gold band she still wore, a bit more worn now but still beautiful. I love you, Nora Knox. I love your sharp mind and your kind heart. I love the way you sing to the children and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love that you see the best in everyone. And yes, I love that you taught me to slow down, to walk at a pace that lets me really see the world around me. I love you too, Nora whispered. More than I ever thought possible to love another person. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to the cold. There were dry summers when the creek ran low and they worried about water. There were illnesses and injuries, moments of fear when a child fell or an animal kicked, but there were far more good times than bad. Birthdays celebrated with cakes and presents. Christmases with the house full of family and friends. Quiet evenings on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. Sunday dinners with Tom, who grew old gracefully, teaching the children everything he knew about ranching and life. Daniel grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as Xavier did. He worked alongside his father, learning everything about running the operation, and Xavier knew that when his time came, the ranch would be in good hands. Emily became a teacher, like the woman Jack had married. She taught at the school in Monticello, riding back and forth each day, and the townspeople loved her for her patience and kindness. Samuel showed an aptitude for working with horses, gentling even the wildest mounts with patience and soft words. The twins were inseparable, two halves of the same whole, and they kept the entire household in stitches with their antics and their identical mischievous grins. Through it all, Nora wrote in her journal. She recorded the daily life of the ranch, the milestones of her children's lives, the deep and abiding love she had for Xavier. She wrote about the challenges her Clubfoot still presented, the days when the pain was bad and she had to rest. But she also wrote about the blessings, the family she had built, the life she had never dared to dream of. When Nora turned 40, Xavier threw her a surprise party. The whole town seemed to show up, crowding into their house and spilling out onto the porch. There was food and music and dancing, and Nora sat in her rocking chair, her clubfoot propped up, and watched as people she loved filled her home with joy. Xavier came and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "Are you happy?" "I am overwhelmed," Nora admitted. "I never expected anything like this. You are loved, Nora Knox, by me, by our children, by this whole town. Everyone here has a story about something kind you did, some way you helped them. You have built a life that touches so many people." "We built it," Nora corrected. "Together." "Together," Xavier agreed. He leaned in and kissed her, not caring who was watching. "Always together." Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep when Nora was 45, surrounded by the family who had claimed him as their own. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the valley, and planted a tree over his grave. Daniel carved a marker from wood, and they all took turns telling stories about the man who had been grandfather to the children in all but name. Jack and his wife had 4 children of their own, and the families grew up together, the children playing together, attending school together, learning the ranching life side by side. It was everything Xavier had dreamed of when he first came west, a community built on hard work and love and mutual respect. As Nora grew older, her clubfoot troubled her more. There were days when she could barely walk, when the pain was so intense that all she could do was sit and let the family work around her. But she never complained, and her mind remained sharp. She still managed the household, still kept the books, still made sure everyone was fed and cared for. And Xavier was always there, adjusting his pace to match hers, carrying her when she needed it, sitting with her when the pain was bad. "We walk together," he would say. "Always have, always will." On their 25th anniversary, the children threw them a celebration. The house was filled with people again, including grandchildren now, Daniel having married a local girl and started a family of his own. There were speeches and toasts, and Emily read from her mother's journal, passages that made everyone laugh and cry. That night, alone in their bedroom, Xavier helped Nora undress, his hands gentle on the buttons and laces. They made love slowly, taking their time, still discovering new ways to please each other after all these years. Afterward, lying in his arms, Nora said, If I could go back and tell that frightened girl on the stagecoach what was waiting for her, I would not believe it. I would think it was too good to be true. But it is true, Xavier said. Every bit of it, and it is still not over. We have years left, Nora. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what Daniel and Emily and the others make of their lives. Years to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Years to love each other. I hope so, Nora whispered, because I am not done loving you yet. I do not think I will ever be done. Xavier tightened his arms around her. Good, because I am never letting you go. The years rolled on, bringing with them the turn of the century. The children grew and had children of their own. The ranch expanded and prospered, one of the most successful in the territory. Utah became a state, and the town of Monticello grew around them, but the Knox ranch remained a constant. Nora's hair turned gray and then white. Her clubfoot gave her more trouble as arthritis set in, and there were days when she could not leave her bed. But Xavier was always there, bringing her meals, reading to her, sitting with her for hours just talking. Do you ever regret it? Nora asked him one day when she was 70 and he was 76. They were sitting on the porch of the big house, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Do you ever wish you had married someone without a clubfoot, someone who could have done more? Xavier looked at her, and even after nearly 50 years of marriage, his eyes still held that same love she had seen on their wedding day. No, he said firmly. Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Knox. You taught me what love really means. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. Your clubfoot is just part of you, and I love every part of you. I love you too, Nora said, her voice wavering with age but still strong. You saved me, you know. When I came here, I thought I was broken. But you showed me I was whole, just different. You never asked me to be anything other than who I am. Because who you are is perfect. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining as they had 1,000 times before. When I said I would slow down so we could walk together, I meant it for life. And I have never regretted a single step. They sat together in the warm sunshine, hands clasped, watching their legacy play out before them. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all healthy and happy, all building their own lives on the foundation that Xavier and Nora had laid. This was what love looked like, Nora thought. Not the dramatic passion of romance novels, but this steady, enduring companionship. This daily choice to walk side by side, adjusting their pace to match each other's needs. This deep knowledge that no matter what came, they would face it together. Tell me again, she said softly. Tell me about the first time you saw me. So Xavier told her the story she had heard 100 times, but never tired of hearing. About the woman in the gray dress who had stepped off the stage with her head held high despite her fear. About the way her eyes had lit up when he said her clubfoot did not matter. About falling in love with her courage and her kindness and her brilliant mind. And as he spoke, Nora closed her eyes and smiled, remembering that girl she had been, so afraid and so hopeful. That girl had taken the biggest risk of her life, traveling across the country to marry a stranger. And she had found everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. Xavier Knox had said he would slow down so they could walk together, and he had kept that promise every day for nearly 50 years. They had walked through joy and sorrow, through triumph and hardship, through the mundane daily tasks of life and the extraordinary moments that took their breath away. They had walked together, and they had built something beautiful. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Xavier and Nora sat on their porch, hands clasped, surrounded by the love they had created. And in that moment, Nora knew with absolute certainty that her life had been exactly what it was meant to be. She had been the mail-order bride with a clubfoot, and he had been the cowboy who said he would slow down. Together, they had walked into a future neither of them could have imagined, but both had helped to create, and it had been, in every way that mattered, perfect.